Mr. Anderson entered the kitchen of his restaurant. The new cook ran from one stove to another in a panic. He was still quite young, but the elderly owner of the restaurant decided to give him a chance. But Mr. Anderson already regretted that he had decided to take an inexperienced employee to his restaurant. He recently graduated from culinary college. In the interview, he very confidently proved that he could handle the job. Now, he couldn't do anything. He was afraid of a large influx of visitors. The chef urged him on, which made him even more confused. An elderly man stepped into the hall. The manager delicately explained to the guests not to worry. When he saw the restaurant owner, he smiled guiltily, ran up to him and offered him a table. Mr. Anderson refused, wished him a good evening, and left the restaurant. He drove to the city center, where another of his restaurants is located. He was used to eating there. The manager of this restaurant, Alex, quickly seated the owner at the table and took the order. Mr. Anderson ate slowly and looked around the hall. This is the most expensive restaurant in his chain. He used to like to dine here. Here, he felt his importance, as everyone looked at him with respect. He looked out the window at the people passing by, understood that he had taken place in life. He can afford a lot. He relaxed and enjoyed life. Therefore, he loved such quiet and measured dinners. Here, it seemed to him that he was a successful businessman. At home, he was the lonely old man who built his fortune all his life, postponing his personal life for later. He was looking for his ideal wife and was left alone with 5 successful restaurants and a fortune that now doesn't please him. Of course, he can get a young wife and pretend that he sincerely believes in love. But Mr. Anderson was tired. Now Alex is running around him. He is his right hand. But if he runs out of money, will Alex still run around him? Maybe yes. After all, he has been his assistant for 15 years. He studied the old man inside and out. Again, he had a pain under the ribs. The pains were getting stronger. Sometimes he was afraid to move. He used to think that the reason was fatty foods, but now they brought him a salad, and the pain still came. And he doesn't really want to eat. He decided that tomorrow he would go to the hospital. He acts like a teenager. He's afraid to leave his restaurant unattended. Now he needs to take care of his health. Mr. Anderson is no longer young. He is over 70 years old. He has always been in good health. He ate any food, and now his liver began to ache. Apparently, the love of fatty foods and alcohol affected. He came to the doctor only a week later. The doctor said, pretending to be carefully examining the test, Stage 4 liver cancer. The doctor also struggled with the dilemma of prescribing an expensive treatment that wouldn't help anyway, or saying that he didn't need the treatment. The doctor handed him the prescription. This will ease your pain. This is the standard set. The patient will feel better. He looked at the patient, trying to determine his financial situation. He didn't like these procedures. Give hope when you know the person is about to die. Many people jump at every opportunity to heal. They spend crazy money, but in his practice, the doctor didn't meet people who would defeat cancer at such an advanced stage. It would be a great miracle to live for several months. The patient calmly asked, "How long will I live?" The doctor looked at him thoughtfully. The old man is neatly dressed. He has a stern look. He's probably used to being in charge. Either he is tired of life or doesn't want to show that the diagnosis scared him. I think about 3 months, maybe 6. We can also provide supportive care and prolong your life. Sometimes the results are good, but I will not reassure you because it's not curable completely, but maybe we'll win the year. Thanks, I don't need it. Mr. Anderson stood up, carefully folded the prescription, and said goodbye to the doctor. An elderly man was thinking, sitting on a bench in the park. So unexpected. I thought I have my whole life ahead of me. I blamed my problems on fatty food and an inept cook, and I didn't think that someday it would all end. He has 3 months left to do something. Strange feeling. Now he understood that in 70 years, he had done nothing good. The girl with the child passed by. A little boy asked his mother for ice cream. A young mother with a cigarette in her hands answered, "I have no money." The older man shook his head. Essentials first, kids later. Many people think that it's perfectly normal to live in poverty, but smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. He also smoked in his youth, but not for the last money. People complain about poverty, but they themselves don't want to get out of there and are waiting for a miracle. An elderly man caught up with the girl with the child and handed the boy several large bills. He smiled at the bewildered child. For ice cream. Then the man left. That evening, he decided to spend the last months of his life in order to give a better life to those who deserve it. And the elderly restaurant chain owner came up with a plan to test his employees. And in addition, he will brighten up the last months of his life for himself, take his mind off his illness, and look from the outside at the work of his restaurants. For the first time in many years, Mr. Anderson visited not a branded clothing store, but a second-hand store. He bought old clothes that had been there for an unknown amount of time, which surprised the saleswoman very much. He came to the market and bought apples from an old woman, inconspicuous and laid out in old bags of apples. The old woman gave the old man a bag and opened an old bag on wheels to put the next bag on her counter. Mr. Anderson asked the old woman to sell her bag. She grumbled in response. "Are you laughing or what? If I don't sell my fruits, how can I take them home later? Around the corner, different bags are sold. Buy any bag you like there." The elderly man smiled. "But I like your bag." The old woman waved off the abnormal customer. Mr. Anderson went to the shop the old woman had recommended, bought a bag there, and stuffed a few bills into it. He returned to the old woman with apples. The man winked at her. "I want your old bag to replace my new bag. I don't need a new bag. I need an old bag for one thing." The old woman relented. "Okay, I agree." She pulled everything out of her old bag and handed it to the customer. Mr. Anderson hurried away from the market, and the old woman began to shift things into the new bag. She called out to the retreating old man, finding money inside the bag. "Man, you forgot something." Mr. Anderson looked around and smiled, indicating that he had not forgotten anything. He was pleased that he helped a good woman. Not every person will find money and admit it. The next morning, he put on old clothes, took the same bag, and went to a familiar makeup artist. By dinner, Mr. Anderson was unrecognizable. He turned into an old man who had just arrived from the village. He went to his nearest restaurant. There were many business centers around. The restaurant was often used for corporate parties, and there were always clients. The income here is good. He knew that waiters with good tips and the manager made good money. The manager was a woman in her 40s. She always smiled sweetly and communicated friendly with visitors. Mr. Anderson wanted to give his chain of restaurants to Ingrid. Serious family woman. She works a lot and hardly sees her family. But at the entrance, he was stopped by a security guard. He said rudely, "You can't." The old man greeted the man. "Good afternoon. Why can't I? Can't I eat here?" Anthony, a security guard whom Mr. Anderson knew a little, stubbornly refused to let him inside without explaining why. After much argument, the visitor insisted that the manager could come out to them. To his unpleasant surprise, Ingrid not only didn't let him inside, but even rudely scolded him and threatened that the guard would use force if the old man didn't leave voluntarily. The first experience didn't live up to the expectations of the restaurant owner. He was disappointed in Ingrid, and he went to the next restaurant. In the second restaurant, he was greeted with a forced smile and explained that there were no seats, and therefore he was also not allowed inside, explaining that all the seats were booked. Mr. Anderson didn't even argue and waste his nerves. He realized that he would achieve nothing. Why would he impose good on someone if people don't want it? Mr. Anderson himself had long understood that it's better not to be rude to people. It's not known how life will go on. Every person you meet in life can be useful in some way. At the third restaurant, he encountered even more rudeness. The manager was not there, but the insistent visitor demanded to call him. He didn't hear anything good on the phone. The manager waved him off. "Old man, eat a sandwich at the station, and it will be cheaper for you, and you won't stain anything with us." Hope remained for Alex's restaurant. In the fifth restaurant, he didn't even doubt that he would be kicked out of there. The owner knew that a big corporate party would be held there today. They probably won't be happy to see him. Therefore, he left the most difficult for last and went to check on Alex's humanity. He approached the restaurant and immediately went into the hall out of habit. The guard stopped him. "Where did you go, old man? We don't let anyone from the street into the toilet." Mr. Anderson explained. "I need to eat some." The guard laughed. "Old man, your pension is not enough to eat here." The visitor began to argue and asked the manager to be called. He is not happy that the guard decides everything. Alex ran out to loud screams. "We don't serve tramps." The man who was his right hand didn't even come close to him. He gestured to the guard to expel the visitor as quickly as possible. Mr. Anderson was upset by the behavior of his employees. He sadly drove to the outskirts of the city to the last restaurant. He went there without expecting anything new. As he expected, the restaurant was full. Only this restaurant didn't live up to his expectations of all. He launched it not hoping for a big profit. He needed to expand, and he wanted his restaurants to be evenly distributed throughout the city. He even recruited some young people to work in his restaurant. As they gain experience, an expensive specialist will not go to such a place. But things went better than he expected. The youth worked with enthusiasm. The manager constantly came up with interactives, and people were interested. The guard met with the guest at the door and asked him to wait. He immediately called the manager. He did it with a smile and without disdain. Manager Scott came quickly. He greeted the guest and asked him to wait until the issue with the table was resolved. The guard offered the old man a chair and a glass of water. Finally, he was invited to a table. Mr. Anderson noticed that they had just set up this place. They took the summer table out of the back room and placed it in the corner of the hall, not embarrassing other visitors. It doesn't interfere with other people, and also the hungry visitor is pleased. Scott offered the menu to the visitor, but the old man said he had little money. He will eat something inexpensive but satisfying. The manager went to the kitchen and placed the order. He sat down at the table with the guest and began to ask him about life. Mr. Anderson came up with some short story about evil relatives. He said that money had been stolen from him when he was returning home from the market. He apologized for causing trouble for the establishment. The manager put his hand on his shoulder. "Trouble can happen to each of us. Maybe you want to work as a security guard with us." Mr. Anderson was puzzled by this proposal. "How am I going to work in this form?" Scott immediately suggested, "We'll give you a uniform." The food was brought to him unusually quickly. These were quite expensive meals. Later, the cook approached them. The same young guy, now he was bolder, proudly straightening his back. He told the guest what each dish consisted of. After dinner, the visitor thanked the manager for his hospitality, promised to think about the job offer, and said goodbye. The next day, the owner called and gathered all the managers in this last restaurant. When he entered there in the form of a tramp, everyone began to talk with displeasure. Only Scott and the local staff greeted him kindly and immediately offered him a free table. The owner went to the kitchen. The cooks worked in unison over the smoking stoves. They politely asked the old man to leave the office, but Mr. Anderson took off his wrinkled cap and beard. He wiped off his makeup with a napkin and wrinkled at the dumbfounded staff. He left the kitchen in the same clothes, but without makeup. The employees were shocked. They began to look at each other and smile guiltily, like guilty kittens. Mr. Anderson began. "I have always wanted my restaurants to be role models. The world would be kinder if people judged each other not only by appearance. It was bittersweet for me to realize that my employees don't share my views on life." Manager started apologizing and making excuses. Only Scott sat modestly on the edge of the table and looked with sympathy at the desperate attempts of others to justify themselves. "I don't have a family, and I'm going to die soon, so I want to leave my business in good hands." Everyone was silent, looking at each other. Mr. Anderson added after a pause, "To Scott." The young manager blushed under the scrutiny of the other guests, and then the owner said that he was firing all of the managers, in whose place he would put the employees of this restaurant. He placed all written orders on the table in front of Scott. Mr. Anderson said, "My inheritance is also distributed among the employees of this restaurant." And the next day, he executed all the papers at the notary. A few days later, he went to a regular clinic, taking with him a large sum of money. The receptionist told him, "The next appointment with the doctor is in a month. Would you like to make an appointment?" The older man smiled. "No. What is his office? Maybe I can get an appointment without a number." The nurse replied, Office number 31, but you will not be accepted. Mr. Anderson walked up to the office, leaned against the wall, and began to examine people. Someone was silent. Someone discussed their problems or shared advice on treatment. Someone snarled, protecting the office door from those who wanted to go there without a queue. When a seat became available, the man sat down. He sat for a long time, watching people trying to fight cancer. A young but sad girl came out of the office. She stood in the middle of the corridor in confusion and pulled out an old push-button phone. She quietly answered the phone. "Yes, I've already left the office. Mom, I need a lot of money, and I still need to raise Max, and I won't be able to work right away. Yes, I have hope, if I have money." The girl talked to her mother about something else, then slowly walked towards the exit. Mr. Anderson got up and followed her. He caught up with her, shoved an envelope into her hand, and hurried away. It looks like he can die in peace now. He knew that he couldn't save everyone. If you did good to at least one person, this is already a big, important thing.